So good morning to those of you in this time zone in North America, and good day to everyone else. My name is Tom Keenan. I teach at Bard College in Annandale, and I direct the Human Rights Program here. It's a real pleasure to welcome everyone to this panel of OSUN, Open Society University Network, senior projects in the field of human rights. There are human rights programs across the network, differently organized and with different foci, but generally all on the same program, which is not a human rights promotion program and not a human rights training program and not a pre-professional program, but a critically minded, historically and theoretically open investigation of human rights discourse and practice. And I think in different ways, the three projects that you'll hear about today and the three presenters that you'll hear from exemplify this commitment, this open, critical, investigative ethos. So we have presenters from the American University of Central Asia in Bishkek, from Al-Quds Bard College in Palestine, and Bard College, Annandale. I'll introduce people super briefly and then let them present their projects. Everybody will speak for about 10 minutes. Each person will speak for about 10 minutes. We'll do all three presentations together, and then we'll have time for questions between the panelists and questions from the audience. Trish is our DJ behind the scenes here. And we'll be admitting people. If you have questions along the way, feel free to use the chat. And otherwise, please keep your mics muted. So our first presenter is Irina Asparina from AUCA in Bishkek. Second is Yazan Mizer from Al-Quds Bard. And third is Maggie Holloway from Bard College, Annandale. Irina, why don't you get started? I think everybody has a PowerPoint of some sort or something to put on the screen, so feel free to take over the screen sharing, Irina. And welcome. Thanks to all of you for doing this.
Hello, everybody. My name is Irina. I'm from American University of Central Asia in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. So can you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm graduating from journalism department, and this year we have kind of innovative senior projects. We don't have senior status. Instead of that, we made up multimedia projects. So two important things to know about the background of this project. Every fourth citizen of Kyrgyzstan in labor age population right now is a labor migrant in Russia. And the second one is that remittances from the migrants made up 1/3 of GDP of the country. So the migrants are the huge part of national economy. And instead of having migrants, Kyrgyzstan will just crash down. So I found out a lot of different research that proved that Russians are are xenophobic against migrants. Kyrgyz migrants and different migrants from Central Asia. Also, in one university, High School of Economics in Moscow, one girl from PhD made up the research about xenophobic discourse in media against migrants. So I found out this research and thought that it should be more public, this information. So I had another hypothesis that Bishkek residents are skeptical against migrants too. So I did up my own research survey, and I proved my hypothesis that Bishkek residents think that migrants are kind of unlucky people, that was forced to move to Russia, that they just want to get easy money and so on. So here is my article for the senior project. So for presenting my research, I found a hero. So hero is Nurbek. He is a builder in Russia, and he had really touching story of working in Russia. He finished up the school in Bishkek and couldn't find the job with good salaries. So he had three sisters and parents, and he was the main financial part of the family. And he was forced to move to Russia, being a labor migrant. So the first work of him in the sphere of building in Russia was really unsuccessful. So he was working for about 3 months without any salary. And as he was employed illegally, because to be employed legal, you should pay about $50, and it's quite a lot for migrants. Therefore, he was working just for meal and the bed. And after that, uh, he was back to Bishkek after 2 years and wanted to start working in Bishkek. But here in Bishkek was another um, difficult situation for him, that he couldn't find job here in Bishkek, that people thought that he had really difficult situation with family. He broke up with a girlfriend. He thought to be married in Bishkek. So he was forced to go back to Moscow because the salaries are much higher there. So here in the project, I mixed up different research and the story of the migrant, how he was working in Russia, how he was back to Bishkek, and tell my findings. For example, on average, salaries in Russia are 3 times higher than in Kyrgyzstan. But at the same time, almost 53 of Bishkek residents think that it's easier for migrants to work abroad, and 60% of Bishkek residents think that migrants are going to Russia, that they have a low quality of education. But in reality, it's not that way, and all of the migrants forced to move to Russia. Uh, all of the migrants with whom I talked for this project, it was 5 people. They said to me that they really want to work in Bishkek and live with family in Kyrgyzstan, but they have to do it in Russia. So a couple of people are working about 20 years there already, and they're dreaming to return to Bishkek, but cannot do this. And 70% of Bishkek residents don't even imagine that migrants made up 1/3 of GDP of our economy. So they think that it's only kind of a bad part of our reality, that a lot of people are going to Russia. So they are really hardworking people there, but nobody sees that, neither in Russia nor in Kyrgyzstan. So also, I'm describing the research about media in Russia, that they are xenophobic. For example, even kind of modern media, they use the word migrant only in the way of describing people from Central Asia. For example, when they're talking about people who came from United States or Europe, they use word foreigner or visitor or something else. But the word migrant used only in the context of danger, of offenses, and so on. And also journalists, a lot of journalists manipulate the data about different crimes. So they made a lot of articles saying, for example, oh, kind of millions of crimes were made by migrants, but inside of these crimes, they are counting, for example, difficulties with documentation or so on. But people reading these articles think that all of the migrants are really murders and so on. So the media are really changing the minds of population, and every migrant feel this xenophobic attitude from local people. So accept the xenophobic attitude. Also, they faced a lot of dangers with government and police. So they even don't have the same rights as local people, even they have legal documentation. There are a lot of cases when employers say that, oh, just go away, we don't give you a salary, and that's it. So my project discovers all of these problems of migrants through the story of Nurbek. So right now he's working in Russia, but he's dreaming about to become a businessman, and he want to made the start capital for this business. So right now he's working as a builder in Russia, but legally. So through all of his difficult way, he found out how that it's important to be legally employed to protect your rights. And the, my time is finished up. Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
you
think.
can take a couple more minutes, Irina.
Yeah, I'm about to finish. And so my project is for Bishkek audience to show them how difficult is the labor of migrants in Russia, and how important is it that we will crash our economy without migrants. And I want just people to know that it's really hard work. And actually, the experts advise that this is a huge gap of the governmental system, that a lot of people just don't know their rights in another country. So our embassy should do more different actions to protect our citizens abroad. So this is the final thought of my project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. Amazing research from both sides of the border there. So thank you. Maybe you can unshare your screen now.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you. So I believe next up is Yazan from Al-Quds Bard in Palestine. Yazan, do you have a camera? Can we see your face while you're talking?
Yeah, my camera.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah.
So Yazan
Okay.
Mizha, welcome.
Hello everyone, my name is Yazan Mizha. I'm from Al-Quds Bard College. So basically my research actually tackles the issue of Palestinian prisoners and the right to health, the issue of systematic violations against Palestinian prisoners. So I will start by explaining the different steps of my research and the different sections in my research. I started my research by explaining what is the right to health under international law, which is the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health. And then I started to analyze the different components that must be included under the right to health to ensure its realization. I mentioned and I explained the issue of prisoners' right to health under human rights law and humanitarian law as well, because as we all know that the right to health is a non-discriminatory right. It must be a right that is enjoyed by every individual, including those who are deprived of their liberties. And I moved on to talk about the Palestinian prisoners' legal status and why they should actually defined as political prisoners or prisoners of war, not not as criminals or terrorists, as what Israel imposes on them, as what Israel labeling them, because Israel uses the concept security prisoners for the Palestinian prisoners, which means that they threat the security of Israel. And then I started to talk about the issue of health conditions and living conditions in Israel, in the Israeli custodies. Most of the what I found in this research is that the health conditions actually in the Israeli custodies are very bad in terms of the sanitation, ventilation, overcrowding, medical negligence, and giving medicines without medical advices, and and very dangerous medical operation are making are يعني by efficient or unqualified doctors. All of the procedures are happen in the Israeli. But the most important thing in my research is that, or the highest level of this research is that this research actually tries to prove that the Israeli the Israeli government actually violated prisoners, Palestinian prisoners' right to health, as we see in this picture. This picture actually actually describes one of the Israeli prisons, which is the Negev prison. As you see that the prisoners, this is the place where Palestinian prisoners are held in these tents actually, and this explains the health conditions in these tents in terms of education and etc. So, as I said earlier, the highest level of this research is to prove that the Israeli violations are done systematically, which means that they are done or based on a fixed ban, and there's a very important very specific component that must be systematic. The, the many ex-prisoners who have experienced these violations. Those prisoners have been imprisoned in different times to prove that these violations actually have been practiced in the past, and Israel is still practicing it up until now. One of these interviews actually are done with Khawla al-Azraq. Khawla al-Azraq actually said that the Israeli soldiers were giving us very dangerous kinds of medicines without any medical advice, such as the Valium and used for the extremely critical cases. And actually, I just the interviews that I have conducted in this research are semi-structured interviews. So the interviewee actually had the chance to actually to express their feelings about their experience, and I caught the more related things, the relevant things, and I just wrote the shared ideas among those prisoners. All of the interviewee actually agreed upon some or specific procedures or specific actions that they experience in the Israeli prisons, such as the medical negligence, such as overcrowding, medicines without medical advices, such as torture, such ventilation, and etc. So, as I said, the systematic issue is very important. I found that the violation of the right to health actually are done in collaboration between the different governmental branches in Israel. For example, let us to start with the Israeli executive body, the interrogators, who made the investigations. They use torture over Palestinian prisoners, as we can see that we can see this photo for a for a Palestinian prisoner. His name is Walid Hashi. He was in prison last year, actually, in September. Walid Hanach has been subjected to an extreme torture, and he couldn't walk for weeks, so he needed a wheelchair actually to walk. And the third picture actually shows some of a technique that the Israeli interrogators use actually against Palestinian prisoners. And there are more 80 types of torture techniques that are used by the Israeli interrogators. Actually, one important point that I have covered in this research is the ticking time bomb policy, which is used against Walid Hanacha. This policy actually allow the ticking bomb policy actually need a decision, a court decision, which means that the judicial system, the Israeli judicial system, also is collaborating in this process of violation, and it allows the Israeli interrogators to use an extreme violence against Palestinians. For the question, actually, I mentioned how how the medical staff in the Israeli prisons are collaborating with this in these violations. For example, the forest feeding operations that is done in a very dangerous way are done by doctors. We all know that the forest feeding policy is a prohibited act under international law and under humanitarian law. But there are also the Israeli Medical Association actually declared that the Israeli doctors should not participate in any forest feeding policy. But actually, we can find that this medical operation done in the Israeli prisons. In the Israeli prisons more than one time, and there is a number of Palestinian prisoners who have been murdered due to this dangerous operation. So we are about the medical staff or the medical staff collaboration in this issue. And then what distinguishes the issue of Palestine and the Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli custodies is that these violations are legalized. Yani, we are talking about specific laws that allow the Israeli interrogators or the Israeli executive body to violate. This is the most important idea, because we can find many laws introduced and passed in the Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli cabinet, the legislation bodies in Israel that allow the Israeli interrogators to violate. For example, the forest feeding law that has been introduced and approved actually in 2010. And there is a law that prohibits the documentation or recording the interrogators, which allow the Israeli interrogators to use any kind of torture against Palestinian prisoners. And there is a law that prohibits or ban the fund of treatment of Palestinian prisoners, as we all know that treatment or the medical treatment of the prisoners must be on the stance. This is the right of prisoners. Actually, that was my main ideas in my research. I have researched the issue of the right to health. I just described the health conditions in the Israeli prisons. I described how the right of Palestinians is systematically violated by the Israeli government, by the Israeli different governmental branches, and how it is systematic. I used interviews with many prisoners who explained their experience in this issue. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yazan. Again, really excellent research, legal research, interviews, fabulous. Okay, we'll save our questions. We have one more presenter, Maggie Holloway, who's coming from Bard College, Annandale, and who did a project that's as much in political theory as it is in human rights. Maggie? There she is.
Okay, if anyone can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yeah, as Tom said, I wrote my project in the Human Rights Department, but also in the Political Studies Department. I think an important first note is kind of thinking about why it's a human rights project in the first place. And it kind of, so I wrote this project on populism, and it was kind of in response to just observing and witnessing contemporary politics, particularly in the US, watching the 2016 election and the different actions of the Trump administration. And I was always drawn to kind of why is it that these forms of politics are so popular and so convincing. So I thought that examining populism would be a good way of thinking about how, quite frankly, very illiberal politics come out of democracies. And this is the connection between human rights and this project on populism. At some point in my project, I'm talking about how we live in this era of democratic sensibilities in a way where there's the dominance of liberal democracies. This is the assumed language of a lot of political conversations in different parts of the world, in like places where there's very long established democratic traditions and places where this is newer. And along with the tradition and this dominance and language of liberal democracy is also the language of human rights. So I was thinking it was kind of an important moment to look very deeply into our forms of democratic politics and to see how it can be seen as human rights related. Because I think that there's also a sense that systems such as strong liberal democracies or things that are perceived as such, that these systems are impervious to human rights abuses. And this was step one of saying that is not true. So I'm going to share part of my preface. So I used a quote from a novel that I love. This is not about democracy per se. It's also not focused on American politics, but it was a good insight into political power. So the criminal regimes were not made by criminals, but by enthusiasts convinced that they had discovered the only road to paradise. They defended that road so valiantly that they were forced to execute many people. Later, it became clear that there was no paradise and that the enthusiasts were therefore murderers. This moment in global political history is being shaped by the presence and success of right-wing populist politics. Notably, the growth and dominance of right-wing populism has shocked political systems and culture in the United States, where the conceptual thread of the people has run through history since the founding of the nation. This far-right populist movement is perhaps the most divisive of any modern political campaign, and it has furthered the already profound polarization of the American public. The election of Donald Trump and its aftermath reveal the irony of his form of far-right populism. This is a movement which claims to represent the American people, and yet its slim electoral victory sparked one of the strongest debates about elections and representation in modern American history. Populism is understood and applied as an incredibly generalized term and is mostly intended as a pejorative in political discourse. To be more transparent, being called a populist is tantamount to being accused of fascist thinking, of committing a serious moral misstep, if not a more fundamental injustice. Yet the only notions directly signified by the term populism are of popularity, of being of the people. In his book, What is Populism?, Jan Werner Müller acknowledges the complete conceptual chaos we face as we approach the topic of populism. So to allege populism as a statement of moral opposition, and only that, scarcely brings us closer to material political progress. If there is to be a politically viable opposition to populism, it must be robust in its claim of what populism does and why that matters, and it must move beyond a superficial moral condemnation. At this point, I'm interested in observing the loud, apparent opposition to the far-right politics of the moment, and identifying both the limits and insights of this popular critique of populism as dangerous and anti-democratic. This involves taking seriously claims that far-right American politics are populist, moving beyond the assumption that the allegation of populism as a pejorative is simply a self-conscious response to success on the right. It's fundamentally a project about democracy as a cultural influence, a system of governance, a social reality, and ideal. I'm writing it in response to the need for nuanced political judgment to help us determine precisely where democracy ends and where populist peril begins. The language of democracy is central to populism, both in populist rhetoric itself and in critiques of populism. When populists or their critics use the language of popular sovereignty, national identity, belonging, and right status, they're also exposing their deeply held convictions about the nature of political organization. Any kind of otherwise legitimate commentary on far-right politics risks being marked hypocritical, if not overlooked altogether, if it does not consider its own relation to the kinds of ideological trappings that it recognizes and condemns in the movement under criticism. If we believe that it is what is ideological about populism that makes it dangerous, we must be aware of our own ideological tendencies. There's a sense that, even with careful effort, we cannot avoid ideology in our own thinking. So I'll spare you the rest of reading a bunch of my preface, but I think this also brought me to an important point, which is that a lot of the project is about ideology. It's thinking about how we form systems of political judgment and how we evaluate the relationship between truth and politics, which is something that has come up super often since, I think it was 2016 that post-truth was the word of the year. So this is something that is in politics constantly, something that I have tried to address in my project. And another important point that is just kind of maybe an ending point is that it is down here. We cannot dismiss right-wing populism as a chance phenomena having nothing to do with democratic politics. So this was a main important point to return to, the idea that the emergency situations that we find ourselves in can come out of things that we really believe in with really strong language, can come out of systems with ideals that we uphold. So, yeah.
Thank you, Maggie.
You're welcome.
Thanks to all three of you. Those were very different, but they share a common critical, inquisitive sensibility, which I think is a hallmark of Bard. Let's go back from the screen, Maggie, maybe.
Okay, I'm not sure how to do it. I'm so sorry.
Down at the bottom where it says share screen, I think you can unshare it from there.
Okay, I actually don't see this, but
If you're in this, if you get yourself back into Zoom.
oh, am I out of Zoom? Let's see. Stop video.
Stop share. No,
No,
you were almost there.
I'm almost there, I swear.
One more, stop share.
Oh, I see it. Thank you.
There we go. Okay. Good, we're all learning on the job here. Okay, I wonder if, let's take a couple of minutes if the three of you had any questions for each other about presentations or about how you did the project, about methodology. We had Arena and Yazan both interviewed people. There was a bit of data in both of the first two projects. Maggie's was scrupulously textual and theoretical. The three of you, any immediate questions for your colleagues?
Not immediately.
Maybe if nobody has any questions, I'll ask one. Oh, Yazan, okay, great.
I have a question for Rita about her amazing topic about xenophobia and migrants and workers. Actually, I would like to add a comment, which I feel that it is relevant to my research. She just mentioned the issue of how those people who are from Central Asia are described as migrant, while those who are from the Western countries are described as terrorists or visitors. Actually, this stereotype actually is very important. I felt that it's relevant because the use of this terminology actually plays a major role in the justifications of such acts. But I would like to ask here about the Russian laws about this issue. If does there any specific law that says in the Russian laws, the labor laws actually, that says that the migrants must be dealt as same as the natives, or must be treated as different than the natives?
Actually, the law is quite equal for everybody. And the main problem that there are a lot of illegal workers. So about 25% of the migrants are working legally, and all of rest are illegal workers. So in case of illnesses, medical care, or protection of the rights, so they will be not so good in the situation. So that's the difference between natives and illegal workers.
Maggie, I wonder if you found any overlaps between the discourse on immigration that was at least part of your topic, and the situation that Irina was describing in Russia.
Yeah, surely. I also think that it was making me think about the need to, I mean, if you're thinking about group identities or national identities or ideas of people, it always is so specific to place and to time. And I was thinking about how similar and how different these similar kind of conflicts are in different parts of the world.
Yeah. Other questions from within the panel? Maybe I'll ask you all three a question. If you could tell us a little bit about your research process, about how you undertook the research, about, I was the advisor on Maggie's project, and I'd love to know how you all worked with your advisors on this, what role they played, and what guidance they gave. Yazan, you want to tell us a little bit about your research process and your work with your advisor? Who advised your project?
Yes. Firstly, I would like to thank Professor Dr. Dan Terz for his effort and guidance in this process. Actually, that was a very long process. It took me almost 1 year actually working on this research. Actually, I have decided to talk, first of all, I have decided to talk about the specific laws and how these laws actually contradict the international standards. And then after many discussions with Dr. Dan, we arrived to the point that, oh yes, we have to know that whether these violations are systematic or not. And we can also mention the laws and its contradiction to the international standards. The process actually was a little bit complicated, because actually proving that for something is a systematic is a very hard, actually, especially in the social science. Yani we can yani, as Dr. Dan says, you can give indications but not proven evidences, and this is the role of the social science actually research. And actually I felt that I enjoyed this process, because in every section I sent to Dr. Dan, he just add comments, and these comments for more clarifications, for more explanation. And I felt that it was interesting, but it was very hard for me, because I needed to review many different conventions, many different treaties. I needed to review the humanitarian law. I needed to review the Israeli law, and this is very important. Actually, this was one of the comments in my board discussion, is that I did not give the number of the Israeli laws. Actually, this is one of the challenges I found in my research, since I couldn't find the Israeli laws in Arabic or in English. And I searched the online, the website of the Israeli government, prison administration, the prison administration website. All of the pages in this website are in the three languages: Hebrew, Arabic, and English. But the page of the laws only in Hebrew. This is what makes it difficult for me to translate the laws into Arabic or into English. So it was one of the challenges of my research. But actually, I used this challenge as an evidence to prove the systematic. Actually, the methodological approach of this. Let me just explain the methodological approach of this research. Actually, it includes both quantitative and qualitative approaches. Since I mentioned some numbers of the sick prisoners in the Israeli custodies, about prisoners who have been died in the Israeli prisons due to the medical negligence, due to torture, due to the forest feeding policy. So this is what makes my research a little bit quantitative, but actually it was more qualitative since it's based on analyzing and it's based on analysis of some books or conventions. For example, there are many primary sources used in this research, such as the international conventions, the international treaties, primary sources such as some reports actually published by some international organizations that talk about this issue. And the secondary sources actually, there were some articles and books have written about this issue, and and the interviews as well. This is what makes my research qualitative. The interviews actually, as you know, that the quarantine and the outbreak in the coronavirus, actually it was very hard for me to make interviews with a number of prisoners. So I managed myself to make these interviews via Zoom. So I could manage this challenge for me, and yeah, I could pass it.
Thank you, Yazan. Arena, can you describe a little bit about your methods of research? You were doing this within the journalism program, but you were acting a bit like a human rights investigator as well, it seems.
Yes, it was just my personal interest because I wanted to know the attitude of local residents, and I had a hypothesis, and therefore I decided to do my own research work. So the main challenge was that I was supposed to go to Russia for the interviews and videos and talking with the heroes, and all of the situation with closed borders made up the situation. So I did online interviews, online photo shoots via Zoom, via WhatsApp, and so on. And I don't have any videos or real photos of my heroes because it's not with the good quality, the photo that they made for me. And therefore, I created my own photo shoot with kind of the builder and all of these people. Actually, it's my family, with my family repair background. And I made the illustrations from that photos. So it was kind of new approach to the multimedia project for me. And actually my advisor is professional journalist, and she really helped me with the text and with the construction of the story and how to build the story of the hero with research data and so on. So I deeply read all of the research from Russia, and I create my own survey and combined all of this data in my research. And actually I did 4 interviews before my real hero, but they were not so bright for the story. It's just ordinary story of migrants with difficulties, but not so representative for the story. And only the 5th hero was really bright with really touching story. So I rejected the 4th interviews, just get the main idea of this their situation, and constructed all of my story with this guy.
So in a normal year, would you have done a multimedia project, or was that specially because everyone was
in
locked
normal
in at
year,
home.
I would do multimedia projects, but with videos, with photos and so on. So I planned to do the whole video story about the hero, from the places of his work, with his emotions and so on. So the person not just scroll and read, and with ability to watch the video, to kind of meet the hero. But that situation at that. So it's just illustrations without any faces and so on.
Right. Maggie, you want to tell us quickly about your process and methods here?
Yeah, sure. So it started around this time last year. I was reading Origins of Totalitarianism, kind of with this bent on thinking about, I mean, first of all, political language, but then also about populism, because I was trying to think of the ways, thinking of people becoming persuaded or becoming moved by political narratives and movements that that are gaining power. So that was the beginning, and a lot of it was just very deep text research and reading, and almost in kind of a definitional way, where I would think of a term and try to explore, you know, what is the literature saying about this? What are the different dominant perspectives? And this was also kind of paired with just like personal research or personal like interest in watching political speeches and videos, and seeing what kind of speech is in the public eye. So this was kind of never a direct influence on the project in the sense of I didn't get to do any, you know, speech analysis or like direct events, but this was always in the background, and it helped me kind of form ideas on about populism by watching what populists do and say.
Yeah, each one of these projects has a very strong relation to present realities, but each of you pursued a different strategy in how to frame those realities and what kinds of conceptual apparatus you brought to bear on them. It was a really interesting contrast here. Let me ask the audience. We have a number of people watching and listening, so we can open up the mic here. You can use the little hand-raising device in Zoom, or you can just start talking, and hopefully two of you won't do it at once. Are there questions? Dan, you can.
Great. First of all, thank you to all three of the presenters. I thought you all did a great job. I'm sorry I didn't catch all of the first one because one of my other students was presenting on another panel at the same time. So I hope to go back to the recording later. I have a question really for all three of you also. One of the great things, we have a lot of students who are studying human rights and international law at Al-Quds Bard College. It's our biggest major. And one of the great things about those students is they bring a lot of passion to the field, a very strong point of view. And many of them understandably start their research projects, their senior projects, understanding that the point of research, the purpose of research, is actually to be able to prove something that you already know. That is to say, a set of violations that are occurring, and to be able to show and demonstrate that. But I think over the course of the research, a year-long project, one of the helpful things about doing research is that it sometimes surprises, leads you in new directions, forces you to maybe rethink or modify some passionate idea that you started with, or at least to change a bit your perspective on it and to try to show it in some new way. So I'm curious for all three of you, which builds a little on Tom's question about method and process. I'm curious about things that were modified in your own thinking. You probably all started your projects with some strong point of view. Almost everybody in human rights does. What were there aspects of your research that led you in some new directions, to some different new conclusions? I think Maggie's presentation pointed sort of most obviously in this direction, but I'm curious about the three of you, whether there were new routes, new ways of thinking, new things that were brought out that you didn't expect to find along the way.
I can answer this question. So when I made up the research, my own survey with Bishkek residents, I had a hypothesis about their kind of xenophobical attitude toward migrants, but I don't even believe that I will prove this hypothesis because it was just my own feeling. So, for example, if we are talking about Russian people, that they're kind of xenophobic against migrants, it's kind of a common knowledge for everybody. And there are a lot of research on that topic. But nobody told before that here local people, have kind of the same attitude toward migrants. So when I did this research, I thought that it would be about 30% of local residents with xenophobical attitude, or 35, for example, but results of the research showed that it's up to 60, 65, 70. So it's quite a lot. So that thing was really surprising for me.
Yes, for me, actually, let me to start by talking about the motivation of writing this project. Actually, the idea actually of writing about prisoners' right to health actually came to my mind based on what I hear in my everyday life. So I thought that yes, I will talk about some violations, I will talk about torture and etc. But then after the discussions, I found that these violations are happening in different places around the world. So I started to think about what distinguishes this issue of Palestinian prisoners. So actually, I started to search on the most as to say the idea that distinguishes the Palestinian context. And actually, I felt that it is very important to speak about the systematic issue. And actually, one of the techniques that I have gained, yani, and I'm very happy to gain this knowledge, is how to analyze the issue or the phenomena and to compare it with the international standards and to transfer it to a legal sheet. And this is the most important idea, yani, that I consider is the most important idea, is how I just analyze the phenomena and I then turned it to a legal sheet and I compare it with international law.
Nice. I can also answer.
Please do.
Great. So I think the most unexpected, but then of course I look back and it seems obvious turn of the project is how much it ended up being about democracy and about the kind of lack of consensus on what a proper democracy looks like or what it's even drawn from. At some points I was thinking about even very basically the word democracy, because it is so rooted in people, and this is also such an important concept of populism. And I think that it was becoming clearer later in the project that if there were to be more, I don't know, a practical or a policy side of it, it could be about different forms of democracy and democratic practice for either already established democracies or countries that are establishing systems, in the sense of how do we filter or how do we represent the will of people in political bodies? How do we organize? I was thinking about just the difference between a representative and a direct democracy and how this can change the possibility for populist politics or for failures of representation.
Thank you all. Great presentations and great answers.
I'll just introduce, Dan Terrace is the Dean of Al-Quds Bard, and I deduce was Yazan's advisor as well. Is that correct? Okay. There's a question in the chat for Maggie. Did you investigate the role of Trump's rallies on the rise of populism? Can you speak to this a bit?
His rallies. I mean, I personally, like, I didn't, you know, write about this, but as I said, this is like just observing all of the different aspects of the administration and the election and the popularity. And I think the rallies are surely a part of Trump as a populist, especially because I'm thinking of where rallies are held and who goes, and it does become kind of an exclusive image of who are American people, especially when the campaign is so divisive and so controversial. It will draw a very particular group of people, and as he addresses them, they become the people that he addresses, which is very significant. I think that is a great example. It's an example of one of the things that fit into this larger narrative about what Trump is saying about American people and how he imagines the makeup and how it comes up every day in political circumstances.
I think we saw that across the three projects. There's very much a dynamic of inclusion and exclusion, of xenophobia, of who counts as a member of the political community and who doesn't, across each of your settings here. Are there other questions from our audience? As I said, you can just start talking, or you can raise your digital hand if anyone has a question out there.
I have a question for Arena. Can I ask?
Please.
Yeah, so I'm interested in your the treatment of the hero as a figure in your telling of the story, and I'm wondering if like you thought specifically about how like what role this person plays, just like as a, I don't know, like an archetype, like as, I don't know if you were thinking about it this way. If you weren't, then
Yeah. Actually, when I had 4 interviews before this hero, I knew some details of the stories of these people, but they were really afraid to tell some details. For example, I knew that one of the guys had a court case and so on, but during the interviews, they said to me, "Oh no, it's totally fine and it's great." And so it was just kind of failed interviews for this project. And with this, my main hero, I knew that he had a lot of difficulties and circumstances in Russia. And we decided with him, as he had not a lot of free time for the conversations, I said to him, okay, let's talk for 10 minutes, but every day, for example, during the week or a couple of days. So we had about 9 or 10 short interview sessions during 2 weeks. So from conversation to conversation, he became more honest with me. So the first one was just superficial. He said just, "Oh, that's my name. Okay, I'm working," and that's it. And I discovered kind of psychological part of this communication with these heroes, that it's really important to be kind of a friend for him. So I changed his name and hide all of the details of his life that he asked me not to cover. So there's no any phone number or something else. So it's super anonymous and private for him. And when he started to trust me, he started to tell his honest story. So that's kind of interesting experience of communication with the heroes. Is it answer for your question?
Yeah, it does in some way. That's interesting. Thank you.
Yes, and I wonder if you had similar experience with your informants of the need to build trust over time and how to learn, how to teach people to talk with you, basically.
Can you repeat your question? Because
Yeah, I wonder if you had similar experiences to Arena in relating to your informants, your sources, whether you had to build trust or were they political people from the beginning, so there was already a kind of a common thread between you? Can you describe that process for us?
do you mean in terms of the interviews?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yes. So I had a long discussion about the interviews and how I can make these interviews because they're sensitive, especially talking about this politically and talking about politics in Palestine is a very sensitive issue. So I tried to make another strategy, which is the semi-structured methodology of making interviews. So I let the interviewee to talk freely about their experience, about their experience in the Israeli prisons, and I have decided some the interviewees who know me and who I know, yani, I know them. So there is a previous trust between us. But actually, the issue was actually about my questions. So what my questions will be. So because you know that maybe some questions will make trauma for them. So all of these things actually have been taken into consideration. And I agreed, me and Dr. Dan, to make these interviews semi-structured. So I let them to speak freely about their experience. So if they feel that they have some, they want to share with my methodology in my interviews.
Yes, and I think I at least lost a bit of that last answer in a screen freeze, but there's another question for you in the chat. Yazan, has this pandemic moment brought
Hello?
new attention to the rights of Palestinian prisoners, whether related to healthcare specifically or more broadly? It seems as if Yazan may be frozen out here. Are there other questions? Okay, Yazan is back now. Can you hear us, Yazan?
Yeah, I hear you.
Great, okay. So here was the second question for you. Has this pandemic moment brought new attention to the rights of Palestinian prisoners, whether related to healthcare specifically or more broadly?
I think yes, because yani, there are many new reports about the isolation room because it was published actually. It appeared that there is a number of Palestinian prisoners who got infected by the coronavirus from the interrogators. So the interrogators have the coronavirus and the interrogations they transmit this virus to the prisoners, and there is no isolation rooms in the Israeli prisons. And you know that this is an infectious disease that could be spread among the Palestinian prisoners. Actually, in terms of the lack of the medical treatment and the lack of the isolation room, it is a very sensitive issues, and there are many new reports about this new situation.
Arena, I wonder if you encountered issues similar to that in your reporting there. Are there particular vulnerabilities of Kyrgyz migrant workers in Russia in relation to the virus?
It was a lot of difficult situation when all of the flights were over, and our government just wasn't care to bring all of the migrants back. So they had really difficult situation right now in Russia because most of them lost workplaces, and they don't have money to go back, and they don't have even possibility to buy a ticket and go back because there are no flights. And this situation organized by government with special private flight with the migrants, but there was about a month when a lot of people were living in airports because there was kind of a transition zone. They don't have money to live in Moscow to rent an apartment there, and they don't have possibility to go back. So it was just really horrible situation, not for only for Kyrgyz migrants, but always for Tajik, Uzbek migrants from Central Asia. But for example, the last flight was made just yesterday from Russia to Kyrgyzstan, special private, or 2 days ago. So it's really, really long process from the side of the government, and it's a really tough situation for the migrants. And also in the case of illness or something else, it's really hard to get quality medical care for them.
Thank you, Irina. Are there other questions? We have a couple more minutes. Give people a little time to think. In the meantime, I can say the chat has a number of compliments for the three of you on your work. You should all be very proud of what you've done. Okay, if there are no further questions, I won't keep you all here longer. Let me say thanks again to you and to your advisors and to all your fellow students, and congratulations. This has been a kind of crazy year to finish your university education and to complete a senior project. And it seems like the three of you did really amazing work in spite of it all. So congratulations again. And I look forward to talking with you and seeing you all in the future. Be well, and thank you everyone for joining us. So, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.